Okay, well, it's James Blane, of course. My middle name is Millard. That's my father's middle name also. But he went by Millard instead of Arthur, which was his first name. But I was born in Mason City, Illinois. Mason City was a little small town. And when I was about one, we moved to Peoria, Illinois, which was a much bigger city. It's where Caterpillar is headquartered. And stayed there and went to grade school and high school, graduated there. And my father was a butcher. My mother worked also. And I had a younger brother, 2.5 years younger. He's still living also in Florida. But I was a junior in high school when Pearl Harbor came on. Nobody in my family knew where Pearl Harbor was, not even my school teacher. Nor did we care at the time. But anyway, we finally graduated in 42. And when you turned 18, I didn't turn 18 until November of 42. So in January 43, there were three of us got together and decided we wanted to join the Marine Corps. There was no depot or office in Peoria. So we hitchhiked up to Chicago and went into the office there and told them what we wanted. And so they said, well, that's fine. You'll have to go through the selective service physical, which is going to be held in Peoria in March. So he says, we'll be down there, and if you pass the physical, why, we'll take the three of you, put you in the Marine Corps. So that's what they did. And we three of us graduated and went into boot camp, of course, by train from Chicago all the way to San Diego. We'd never seen an ocean before. Never been out of the state of Illinois. Kind of a farm country that we were from, but let's see, I'm trying to think when I graduated from boot camp. It was 12 weeks, I think it was, at that time. And our platoon was one of the few platoons that graduated without losing a person, either to some disease or flunked out or one of the other things. I was told that was unusual at the time. And Tyrone Power, the actor, was 2 platoons ahead of us. So I saw him fairly regularly in the head. And he had a girlfriend at the time. In fact, I even think he was married to a French girl. And she brought her car around, a convertible, every weekend and picked him up. Took him out for the weekend. I don't know how he managed that, but he got away with it. My MOS at the time was a clerk, because I knew how to type. I took typing in high school because I couldn't read my own handwriting. So I took typing. I was the only boy in the class, but I didn't get hackled about it because I was an athlete at the time in school. But they put me in an office after boot camp at Camp Elliott, working with another guy. And I was there about a month and a half, and one day here comes walking in a lady in one of those Marine Corps uniforms that you have back there, all dressed, beautiful looking gal, but of course she's 22 years old, I'm 18. I wanted to ask her for a date, but I didn't try. But anyway, she asked me if my name was Jim Blane. I said, yeah, and she said, well, I'm taking your job. Okay, so I worked with her for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. Then they moved me on up to Camp Pendleton. Up to Camp Pendleton, I was assigned to H&S Headquarters Company of the 20th Engineer Regiment. H&S Company was the headquarters where all the educated people were. All of the guys were college degrees, much older than me. I was the youngest guy in the company, and I was the company clerk, or the runner, or the gopher, whatever you want to call it. And but we had all the instructors, the demolition people, the architects, the engineers, draftsmen, you name it. That's where, and they loaned out those guys to other parts of the division for teaching or for battle work, whatever is needed. We were there for until January of '44, and we got on a troop ship with a convoy and went out to Honolulu and boat docked at the West Virginia. They were using it as a dock for troop ships. And we had 3 troop ships and walked right across the deck of the West Virginia onto Fort Island. And of course, that's where we formed our convoy. And we got liberty, went into Honolulu for the first time. Some of them got drunk and tattooed. I didn't. Didn't do that sort of thing. We shipped out, and from there we went to the island of Roi-Namur. We did stop at the island of Maui, but offshore. We did not get to go ashore. We refueled and got food, and some of the officers went ashore. But we didn't know what the island was. We had to ask somebody, and they didn't want to tell us, but we found out it was Maui. But that was the first division of the Marine Corps that went direct from the States to the battlefield without stopping to pick up a convoy. All our other missions we stopped and made a convoy. But Roi-Namur was in the Kwajalein Atoll. It was a very small island connected to another island, Roi-Namur, with a cement causeway. It was part of the island hopping campaign that MacArthur and Nimitz had put together, where you bypass a whole bunch of other islands and you pick out the ones that have an airfield. Roi-Namur happened to have an airfield. And in the Kwajalein Atoll, which is about 200 miles long, Roi-Namur was right at the top of it. The island of Kwajalein is at the bottom, over the horizon. But anyway, we took that island in about 5-6 days. It was so small, both of them. But my experience there was when I learned what war was about. Because the guy ahead of me that went ashore took a shell right through the throat into his spine. Guy I knew in my platoon. And he was dead before he hit the ground. Now, thinking back on it, that's when my whole mental attitude toward the Marine Corps and war changed. In other words, you grew up in about 10 minutes right there. They're killing us. And you better get with it. So all the guys felt the same way, which was our first operation. But we had some veterans, not in our unit, but some other ones there, who had come out of the 2nd Division. So 5 days we were there, cleaned that up, turned it over to the Army, and then got on a troop ship and headed back to the island of Maui, which turned out to be our base camp, which was already built, and truck loaded on up to the base camp. So we lived in pyramidal tents there. Here again, I went back to my duties as a clerk, working in the office, pounding on a typewriter and filling out forms and trials and all that sort of thing. Typing, and I did take shorthand, but I didn't use it in the military. In fact, I flunked that side of it. There was about 6 of us in each tent. It was a tent city, and it was on the upslope of the Haleakala crater, if you're familiar with Maui. And so we always kidded each other about having one leg shorter than the other one, because we're always walking sideways up to go to chow or the slop chute or someplace. But a lot of training, replacements we had to get for the guys we lost at Roi-Namur, which weren't very many. but I was back in my clerk duties. And then in, I think it was early June, we loaded up again, went to Honolulu to form a convoy, and went to the island of Saipan, which was our second landing. And we were assault troops at that time. They kind of switched back and forth, assault troops or support troops. And on most of the landings, we were support troops. But on Saipan, we were assault troops, which means you were in the first group that first few went in the first morning or the first day. When we landed on Saipan, when you go down these ropes, you know, these landing ropes, it's a big net, is what it is. Well, the first three guys down, they're the ones that have to hold it and pull it out away from the edge of the Higgins boat, because the Higgins boat is bouncing and the ship itself is barely moving because of the weight. We had to hold that net out because guys that are putting their feet through those loops, that Higgins boat we found in training came down and broke their foot. The inside railing of the Higgins boat, we had some broken feet in training. So the first three guys down, which I did, I was one of the gophers that had to do that, holds that net out till you get enough guys down there that the boat has got a load and it stops bouncing like that, the Higgins boat. Then you can kind of let it go. But anyway, when I was landing at Saipan, I was one of the first three guys down in the net, and I'd fallen off. I lost my grip. I had a huge weight pack on me, and the Higgins boat was coming up as I was falling. And it was like falling off a 10-story building. And I wrenched my knee, I jammed this hip and this shoulder, all three. And here I am in the Higgins boat, waiting to go ashore at Saipan. Of course, I was young. And when I got ashore, the first thing I did, well, dig a foxhole, of course, was find a corpsman and ask him if he could help me, because I was limping pretty badly. And he asked me if I wanted to be evacuated, and I said, hell no. So he gave me some pills, whatever they were, pain pills at the time. Saipan, of course, was a much bigger island, mostly jungle. It was 25 miles long, about 8 miles wide. Had a native population there called the Chamorros. Had a city, a capital, even had a bank. Which was a Japanese had cleaned that out, of course. But anyway, there were three divisions, the 2nd Marine Division, our 4th Marine Division, and the 27th Army Division. And we landed on the south part of the island and then worked our way up, pushing the Japanese back up toward the north part of the island, a day at a time. It took us about 35, 40 days to actually secure the island. Here again, they had a Chamorro native population, which had been slaved by the Japanese. They killed most of the men or used them as laborers. The women they took care of in other ways, and the children, they abused them also. They were brutal to those natives. We moved up to the upper end of the island. We had one incident happen. Our philosophy as in Marine training, when you come to a pillbox or a cave or something like that, what you do is neutralize it. We had the 2nd Division on the west side, the 4th Division on the east, and the 27th Army Division in the center. Well, the Army Division had a different philosophy. If they ran into a pillbox, they stopped moving. And they waited until they could fully secure that pillbox before they would move ahead. So what happened was we neutralized pillboxes, and we kept moving ahead. And both of our flanks were wide open. The 27th Army Division was back here, and we took casualties because of both of those flanks were open. And that's when General Holland M. Smith fired the general that was running the 27th Army Division, and his name was Smith also. But Holland Smith, we called him Howlin' Mad because his middle initial was M. Howlin' Mad Smith. Anyway, he replaced that general, a 3-star general, and sent him back to the States. It was quite a political incident. But anyway, we moved the Japanese back up to the other end of the island, and that's where we ran into what was known as Suicide Cliff. We had 2 separate cliff areas, one called Banzai, the other was Saipan, or Suicide Cliff. And the Japanese natives had been told that Marines were savages. And if you surrender to the Marines, you're going to get killed or brutally beaten or something. Or your children are going to be cooked and eaten or something. So the natives didn't know what to do, whether to stay with the Japanese or to surrender to the Marines. So their option was to commit suicide, which they did. So with about 1,500 of them jumped off of that cliff. And to watch them throw their babies into the water and then jump in after them was a sight to behold. And it's on film. We hired one of the elders of the Chamorro tribe, and we set up a PA system up on top of the cliffs. We were on top, and all of the natives were down below in the caves. And we had the elder preaching to them over that PA system, to try to talk them into surrendering, that the Marines will take care of you, and not to worry that they're not savages and so on. A good many of them did surrender, and we had to set up a compound for them, fed them, our corpsmen took care of them, and the word got around. So we saved a lot of those natives, but a good many of them went ahead and committed suicide. Not a pretty sight. Look down there and see babies floating in the water. I hope I'm not scaring you. Saipan and Tinian are just 3 miles apart, tip to tip. So from Saipan, we went over to Tinian, which is in the same Marianas group. And just the 4th Division and the 2nd Division. The 4th Division was the assault division, which was ours. And our brass pulled off a maneuver there, which was rather unique, and it is written up in the history books. Tinian Town, it was a much smaller island, but it was flat, and it was all cane fields. Tinian Town was on one end of the island, and it was the only beach that anyone could possibly consider landing on. And they had big shore guns at each end of the beach to protect the island. But on the other end, on the north side, there was one beach which was 60 yards long, one beach was 160 yards long. So our officers all got together and decided to pull a trick on the Japanese. So the 2nd Division went down to Tinian Town in troop ships and started climbing over the ropes to get into the landing boats. All the Japanese forces went down to Tinian Town to protect that. The 4th Division stayed back, and we put Amtraks inside of LSTs, which was the first time I think they'd ever done that. And they put us in the Amtraks, side by side, and you could put 6 or 8 of them in a LST. So our assault troops were in these LSTs and just sitting afloat back there opposite the 60-yard beach and the 160-yard beach. Well, the Japanese got fooled. So they opened the doors when the 2nd Division started getting into the landing boats, the Higgins boats. So out come the Amtraks, and we got about 3/4 of our division ashore before the Japanese knew what was going on those 2 little tiny beaches. And I've been back there to look at both of them. I don't know how we ever did it. But those 2 big shore guns they had at each end of Tinian Town, they only went 180 degrees. In other words, they couldn't turn them around to fire at us. We didn't know that. So it worked out pretty nicely. Tinian, we cleared that up in about 10 days or 2 weeks. Small island, but flat. And of course, I forgot to mention that one of the battalions that we had with the 20th Regiment was a CB battalion. They were the ones that built all the airfields and roads and so on. Well, we left them there. We separated and left the battalion of CBs there to build the Tinian Airfield, which became the largest airfield in the world at the time. And that's where the Enola Gay was based. And that's where the B-29s started coming in, the first ones to start bombing the home islands of Japan.
We interviewed a B-29 pilot who lived in Broomfield here, who flew out of that base.
Yeah.
And he was in the same group as the Enola Gay.
Well, all 3 islands, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, were bases for the 29s. They could put about 350 of them in the air at one time. But the Tinian field was, of course, the largest, and that's where the Enola Gay was based. And that's when they started their bombing runs through Japan and Tokyo. Going back, we did go back to Tinian. I've been back twice with the foundation that I'm on the board of. And they have 2 cases like this, only they're all glass. And that's where they had to put the B-29 over that pit. They had to dig a pit to put that bomb down in there, Little Boy and Fat Man. And then they had to winch them up into the plane. Both the Enola Gay and the other one, trying to think of the name of it.
The boxcar.
Boxcar, yeah. Bockscar. It was aimed after a pilot. His name was Boxcar. Anyway, those pits are there now, but they have glass over the top of them, and they're tourist attractions. And it gives a story on there of why they're there and they're being preserved. Well, the CBs did all the construction. We even took one CB back with us to go to Iwo. And he had been on Iwo. And he was a black guy, by the way. And of course, the Marine Corps didn't have black people in the Corps during World War II. And this guy was local. He's deceased now, but heck of a neat guy. I got to know him pretty well. When I first went to Pendleton, the CBs were really embedded with us. They could wear a Marine uniform or a sailor's uniform, either one. Now, don't ask me why or how that worked out, but they were living with us in this engineer battalion or regiment. I was kind of surprised at that, but nevertheless, I had to get used to it. But then they kind of separated away later on, and when the CBs became more, CB is CB Construction Battalion, and but they were still with us when we landed on Tinian, but not after Tinian. We had no more CBs because they stayed right there and built that airfield. But there may have been some other battalions but that's the last I ever saw of them.
Early on, when we started doing interviews out here, we interviewed a man who was a CB on Tinian. And can't remember exactly what unit.
Was he a Marine?
He was Navy. He was a CB.
CB, He
He was
could have.
Navy, but he was
Well,
part of the crew that was building the B-29 airfield.
well, that's what our CBs ended up doing. Now, they weren't the only battalion there, I'm sure, because they had to have a lot more. I'm sure there was a CB battalion with the 3rd Marine Division that landed on Guam. And the 2nd Division probably had one. I don't know for sure. Because they were with us on Tinian. And Tinian, where the hell's that? They never heard of it, you know. They've all heard of Iwo Jima and Guam. And of course, Saipan and Guam are both kind of resorts now. Tinian is not. It's just a cane field. Nice people, but
On Saipan and Tinian, were the Japanese dug in and hard to root out? Were there caves, or was it?
no.
You mentioned Tinian, it was flat country. In Saipan, was it?
They had a few on Saipan, but they didn't utilize them like they did at Iwo, you know, and places like that. They didn't utilize them that way. They had the officers all had houses that were built up on stilts, and they even had machine guns set up in those houses. And a good many of our guys got caught trying to sneak up to those houses, unfortunately. But the island, other than was almost 90% jungle. Did have fresh water on the island, so we were able to utilize that. With our engineer battalion, we also had the desalinization units that we had to run, where you have a hose that goes out into the seawater and brings it in and desalts it, and then puts it into the 5-gallon cans, which we absolutely had to have at Iwo because there was no water there at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So we cleaned up the island of Tinian, turned it over to the Army again and the Air Force, and then we got aboard troop ships and went back to Maui. We took a lot of casualties, but we secured the island and turned it over to the Army again. There were still pockets and so on that had to be fixed, so we left that all to them. And then our two divisions went back to our base camps, which was Maui again, by troop ship. And I think it was on this troop ship that we had so many casualties that they would not let anybody that was ambulatory have any water. They only had so much capacity to make water. So anybody that could walk, including the casualties, you had to drink coffee. I didn't drink coffee. And I told the captain that, and he said, well, that's too bad. You'll just have to live what the rules are because we only have so much water. They had enough water for the casualties that could not walk, and the crew, and not enough for the guys who were ambulatory like me. So he sent me down to the cook to try to teach me how to drink coffee. He says, well, here, I'll give you this nice big cup, and he put coffee in there, and you know what condensed milk is? Ugly stuff. He filled it up with that. And I was on guard duty that night. And what I mean guard duty is we had 2 curtains on the troop ship. And when you're going out to the deck, you had to go into the first curtain and close it. Then you had to open the second curtain and then close it when you got out in the open. That's to keep any light from shining out. So I was inside that little phone booth type thing to make sure the curtains were closed if any of the crew went out onto the main deck. Well, it was a stormy night and I got seasick, threw up everything. And when my replacement came to pick me up, I'm laying on the floor. Well, I had to go to sick bay and they gave me water. Just one of our experiences. We went back to Maui, more replacements and more training. And we lost some more of our squad at both Saipan and Tinian. So we had to have some replacements, and we lost quite a few there at Saipan. I have pictures of Saipan. We lost some of our squad. We started out with a 14-man squad backing up, which is what we called a battlefield squad. It's 3 4-man fire teams, it's 12. Then you had a squad leader, it's 13, and then you had a gopher, a runner, which was 14. That was me in our squad. But we had a lot of closeness in our squad. And so we lived together at Maui in these pyramidal tents again. And I went back to my duties as a clerk, doing all the typing and so on. But I wasn't excused from having to go out on the training missions, overnight hikes and all that sort of thing. I had to continue to qualify for the weapons. I wasn't excused from any of that at all, because once we left camp, I was back as a rifleman. We had one incident there when I was working in the office, and the first sergeant that ran the office there caught me as I was going out the door to go down to the tent, and he said, "Whoa, wait a minute, I want to talk to you." And I said, "Well, what about it?" He said, "Well, I had to see about your record that you had applied for OCS out of boot camp." And I said, "I did." And I was turned down by the gunnery sergeant that told me that he didn't believe that anybody out of boot camp could go to OCS because they should have some combat experience before going to OCS. My first sergeant said, "Well, would you like to try again?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Can I think on it a little bit?" So I ran down to my tent, and of course I was living with guys who were quite a bit older than me. Here again, I was the youngest guy in my unit, and I told them what had happened. He said, "Well, you better think about that, because remember, it's a 6-year commitment." I said, "Well, I'll go back and see the sergeant and turn him down," and I did. Because I told him I don't want to do this for 6 more years.
You had mentioned going in the first landing kind of dispelled whatever image you had of what the war was going to be for you. But you say you made 4 landings. And how was your mindset when you went in, say, the second, third, fourth time, when you had a better idea of what you were going to be facing?
I had a better idea what I was going to be facing. And I could see some of the guys that did not have the idea what they're going to be facing. And I think I helped them. All of us did. We wanted them to be part of us. Our squad was, we had replacements for our squad every time on all 4 landings. So we had to help them. There's a thing with veterans that they may not admit, but we don't want to really get too cozy or with a new guy coming in. You've already got your foxhole buddy who's lived through all of that you've lived through. But you want to help this guy, but you don't want to get him to the point where he has to depend on you, like we depended on each other when we first started. So no, we had some good replacements, darn good ones. And we had some that, I'll tell you one other story that you may have heard before. Some of these idiots that come back from the first operation that they're on, they bring back the skull of a Jap or gold teeth or something. I saw some sailors off a ship in there cutting off pieces of airplanes to take aboard ship with them. And some of these guys bring this stuff back with them, and the replacements come in. And these guys talk to them about these stories, and they exaggerate. And we had one kid committed suicide on Maui before he ever got into an operation, just listening to some of these idiots talking. But you run into all kinds. All kinds.
You actually addressed my next question, because I was going to ask you about the replacements. What you've talked about is very common with other stories that we've heard, not just with infantry, but with airmen as well, that they had a very similar attitude. They didn't want to get close to somebody until knew they could prove themselves.
Right.
So that's very common.
That's a good way to say it.
How many Marines went through something like that, through the Pacific?
Well, there had to be quite a few. I don't know what the percentage would be, but as I say, there was only 3 of us left in our squad that made the first landing, that survived the 4th. So that out of 14. And if you're in an infantry group, of course, that's what's going to happen. And we were not an infantry group, but we were an engineering group. Was almost the same. And once I landed on the troop ship, I was just a rifleman, not a clerk. Guys that were engineers or architects or something like that, sure, they would not be exposed as much to the gopher in the squad was, or the infantryman. So that group of people would survive a lot easier or more often than the rest of us. It's your frontline troops that really take the beating. We loaded up again. I'm thinking of late March, early February, at Hawaii to set up a convoy. We didn't know where we were going. We did find out later. They never tell us anything down in the lower part of the troops, you know. And my squad leader found out they were going to Iwo Jima. Well, who the hell knew where Iwo Jima was? Never heard of it before. And of course, the Japanese had known a year in advance that Iwo Jima had to be taken. Strategically, it had to be taken. When you think about the statistics, B-29 had a 3,000-mile range, fully loaded. The fighter planes that we had a 1,500-mile range. Iwo Jima was 750 miles from Tokyo and 750 miles from Tinian. So the B-29s could be escorted to the area of Tinian, and then they had to turn around and go back. So the Japanese knew a year in advance that Iwo Jima, being strategically located as it was, would probably 90% sure that it would have to be taken. So they fortified it accordingly. They built 17 miles of caves and tunnels underneath the island. They even had a 2-story hospital in there. And those tunnels went right up into Mount Suribachi to the top of it. There's a map that somebody drew that shows all these caves and tunnels, and I have a copy of it. I think I do somewhere. We got in the convoy and headed out and stopped at Inuitak to get mail, more water, and they even let us go swimming. We got to dive off the ship. And I think there was a reason for that. They picked up mail there and back into the convoy, zigzagging it all day and all night, and arrived offshore at Iwo around February 19th, which was D-Day at Iwo. 3 days before we landed there, they distributed mail. And they had the mail on board, but they didn't distribute it until the third day before we landed. And I got a Dear John letter, a Dear Jim letter from the girl that I was engaged to back in the States. She'd already married somebody else. That's quite a blow to a 19-year-old kid. So that hit me pretty hard. But anyway, we got to Iwo, and we couldn't even see the island. The Navy had bombarded it for 72 straight hours. All you could see was the top of Mount Suribachi sticking up in the daytime. The rest of it was just complete smoke. That's all. We were support troops at the time, but my commanding officer, Colonel Brown, was one of the leaders of the Beachmaster group. And he was the chief beachmaster on our beach, which was Blue Beach on the north part of the landing beach, which is the only beach there. So I went ashore with him the night after dark on D-Day. There was just three of us, 2 bodyguards and him. So he commandeered a Higgins boat. Apparently he'd lost contact with his contact ashore, the guy who became a casualty or got killed. So he went to Plan B, which was to come ashore with 2 bodyguards in order to pick up his duties as beachmaster. And beachmaster is a guy, it's the traffic cop, that tells where the boats to land and which ones to come in and the troops to land and so on. You have to have that on every beach because you got more equipment than you have beach, obviously. I went ashore with my CO, and it was pitch dark. Bombardment was still going on, not like it was in the daytime, because they couldn't see that well, but they still continued to bombard us from Suribachi and the cliffs over on the other side of the island. We were caught right in between. Heavy guns on both sides, just to keep us in place. They didn't bombard us like they did in the daytime, where they could actually see us, because there were no foliage on Eagle at all. It had all been taken down, what there was of it. And you've seen the pictures of the sand, volcanic ash, we called it. And they had built those 2 terraces, man-made terraces, where you climb up 2 steps and slide back 1, and it went up over your ankles. You're carrying a 80-pound pack with your cartridge belt and hand grenades and a M1 rifle with a bayonet. So that stuff you couldn't even dig a foxhole in it because it kept caving in. In the daytime, we were just nothing but targets. But at night, I found a place to sleep, but I crawled into a hole where a radio operator had a generator running. And I'm surprised I didn't die in there because of the carbon monoxide coming out of that gasoline-run motor, but at least the top was open. But I hid in there until daylight. The next day, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't find my commanding officer. I couldn't even find the other bodyguard because our group hadn't come ashore yet. They didn't come in until 2 days later. So I reported to the first officer I could see. Officers were identified by a marking on the back. They did not wear shiny bars and all that sort of thing. Our rank was identified on our body armor, which was like this, dungarees that we wore. So I found an officer, and he put me to work, wading out into the surf and pulling in dead bodies and body parts to get them out of the way of the other troops coming in and the Higgins boats, to get them out of the way, push them up on the shore, which is kind of a grisly job, but somebody had to do it. And that's what he put me to work doing for 2 days. But anyway, war is war.
Does something like that even register with you when you're doing it as to what you're actually doing?
Well, it does in a way, but you got to do it and forget about it because you're still getting shot at. And you're still losing guys on that open beach there. And your thoughts are, get as many out as you can so if you finish the job, you can go hide somewhere. But thinking back on it, I don't know. I was just in a different world at the time. I'd already a veteran of 3 other operations, so I just knew that we had to do our job and try and figure out how the hell we were going to take this island. So I kept doing that, and the desalinization units had not come in yet, but they had to get those in there pretty quick. So 2 days later, they did come in with our group. So that was another job that I had, is to help set up those water making units, because there was no fresh water on the island. And they did get one LST in. It got hit by a mortar, but it was bringing nothing but water, these big 5-gallon cans. And my job after getting the sandbags around the units was to go out in the water, and because the intake tube had a big screen on the front of it, but as it was sucking the water in, sometimes a body part or a piece of a landing boat would get caught up against that. So I'd have to clean that off, and so I could continue sucking the water in. Sometimes I was up over my head. But I know how to swim. But my unit finally came in 2 days later, and we went about our duties that we were assigned to. I was just a rifleman, and being a gopher in the H&S company, well, I was assigned to different groups. Every day I was with a different group, practically, filling in for somebody who'd gotten killed or a casualty, one squad or another, and hauling ammunition, hauling explosives, hauling water up to the front, body detail, getting the dead bodies and taking wounded guys down to the beach. We had a small temporary hospital set up down there. It even got hit a couple of times. It was a slaughter, absolute slaughter. And I really have a feeling sometimes that our top leaders weren't really too sure if we were going to be able to make it. Thank the Lord we had the 3rd Marine Division in reserve. And they came ashore the 4th day. Thank God for that. At least they considered having a reserve division, because it was the 4th Division, the 5th Division that made the landing, and the 3rd Division in reserve. 5th Division was one that went up and took Mount Suribachi, and they were the guys that raised the flags and all that. We turned north and went up where the cliffs were. That was our job. I should back up because the flags had gone up, if you recall. On the 21st of March, 23rd of March, the first flag went up, and the rumor going around was that Mount Suribachi was going to be neutralized because we were going the opposite way, and we were being fired at from behind by Mount Suribachi. So the rumor was going around, and pretty soon we heard the ships in the harbor start blowing their horns and their klaxons. And it was a loud, loud noise, and we knew exactly what had happened, that the top of Suribachi had been neutralized. So all I had to do was turn around, and I could see the flag. It had already been raised, which was a huge relief to us because we wouldn't be fired at from behind. So we could concentrate on what was ahead of us and not worry about what was behind us. Then, of course, they raised a second flag, which was larger. You know that story, how it goes. We were mostly working in kind of a daze. I don't know. You had to do what you had to do, and bouncing from one job to another, hauling ammo and hand grenades. A sack full of hand grenades, get them up to where somebody needed them, because they were trying to close up those caves, many tunnels. Nighttime was bad because they would sneak out of those caves. There are a lot of stories that other guys have told, but those Japs would sneak out of those caves, either hunting water or food, or just trying to perform the duty that their commanding officer had told them. You have to kill 10 Marines before you can finish your job here Iwo Jima. They knew they were going to lose it. Even the commanding officer, Kurobayashi. You know, the letters from Iwo Jima they found told that story in there. But anyway, we kept going. We lost some more of our squad. There were so many firefights I got into, I can't remember all of them, but I was on guard duty on the 13th day, which was the 3rd of March, at our compound. We had our engineer compound. We had concertina wire around it. And we had all the ordnance in our compound, being the engineer battalion, where the stockpiles were. So I was hauling stuff out of that stockpile up to the front, both to Suribachi and over to the other side. But I drew first watch. There's first, second, and third watch. First watch is 8 to 12, 12 to 4, 4 to 8. So I drew first watch that night. We had a foxhole. We were able to dig one, and we put our ponchos over it to keep it from caving in. A lot of rain and nights. And I was sitting on the edge of my foxhole, and I stood up to go over and check the concertina wire because I had a little place set up there where I could get through it without rattling the wire, because we took little sea ration cans and put holes in them and put 45 empty cartridges in there, about 3 or 4 of them, and then hung them on the wire so that anytime anybody touched the wire, you could hear those things rattling. And it worked. So anyway, I had a little secret place that I could go through there. And I saw 3 or 4 or 5, I couldn't count them. We were right at the end of the second airfield. I saw them coming out right at twilight at the end of the runway. I could see them. It was almost dark, but I challenged them. I ran out there about 30 yards and started firing at them, and I emptied my magazine. My foxhole buddy was about 20 yards behind me because I shook him before I got out. And they fired back at me. One of their shells went right through my foot, one side out the other, and another one, as I went down, bounced off the top of my helmet, put a hole in it about that long. Of course, we had a space between our liner and the helmet, and it didn't hit me. But I went down, my foxhole buddy got a corpsman, came over, and one of the mistakes that we had made is that we sent our flares up to light up no man's land at the same time every night, and that was a mistake. The Japanese knew exactly what time of night we were going to send our flares up. So just before we sent our flares up, these guys had come out and tried to do as much damage as they could. Anyway, I went on down to they took me down to this field hospital we had in the middle of the night. And off to one side, there were bodies laying there with the ponchos pulled up over the head. They were ready to go to the graveyard. And on the other side, there were wounded guys like myself. And I could hear the corpsmen doing triage. They had so many casualties. And it wasn't pleasant to listen to, but that's what they had to do. Move from one guy to another and try and determine which one they could save and which one they couldn't. Well, morning came and the bombardment continued. But on the 3rd of March is when I got wounded. So I was evacuated the next morning by Higgins' boat out to a troop ship. And they put me on this troop ship. And before we left the harbor, there were 506 casualties on this ship. And the reason I know that is because later on, after the war was over, I got the log of the ship. It was the USS Bolivar, and I'd been on it before. But I got the log of the ship as a civilian. 506 casualties, 7 of them died before we left the harbor. They took those guys ashore to go to the graveyard. And then we took off in a small 3-ship convoy to go to Saipan, to the hospital. 16 more died on the way to Saipan. Every day, they called us up on deck to watch, be witnesses to burial at sea. Of course, you know how that's done, where they put a 5-inch shell in a body bag on a cot, put a flag on it. Chaplain says his prayer. They lift the cot up. The body bag falls out. The 5-inch shell takes it to the bottom of the ocean. And the flag is sent back to the family, if they can find the family of the dead guy. About the third day out, B-29, they called us back up on deck. About 2,000 yards off our port beam was a B-29 getting ready to land in the water. How they ever found our convoy with no radio, no lights, no nothing, because we were in enemy territory, is God's help, I guess. But they put that ship down in the ocean, and as soon as it hit the water, it flipped over. We got to watch it. So they, here again, I got the log. They sent one of our DEs, destroyer escorts, over to see if they could save some of the crew. And the USS Hudson was sent over there. And out of the 16-man crew, is it, that's on, or is it 12-man? I can't remember. They saved 4 guys off of that airplane. And the rest of them all drowned with the airplane went down. But the Hudson had to get out their guns and fire at the airplane to get it to sink, so the Japanese could not use it as, you know, the enemy couldn't capture it and get technical instruments and all that out of it, but they had to sink it. Anyway, we finally got to Saipan, and zigzagging with no lights, and here again, guard duty. I didn't have guard duty because I was one of the casualties. But we got to Saipan and were unloaded there, and they had a temporary hospital set up, which I was in, one of the wards. Am I running out of time here?
Oh, no.
No,
No, take as much time as you need.
you want to go?
I had to have therapy on my foot, whirlpool, so I had to do that every day. And then the doctor came in and finally put a cast on my foot, but I could hobble on it. So I usually got dressed. I didn't like the damn gowns that they had everybody, because I could go to the head by myself. But it was Fort Island. No, that's Fort Island, right. Anyway, one of the nurses started hollering for my name. He said, "Where's Jim Blane?" I said, "Well, I'm right here. What do you want?" Well, I was one of the only guys that was ambulatory. So she said, "Well, come on, you're coming with me." And outside the ward, I grabbed my little shaving case I had. That's all I had left. And ran outside, and there was a Jeep there waiting. 2 soldiers, and jump in. I got in the Jeep and drove down to the boat dock. And here was a twin-engine Catalina flying boat with the propellers idling, sitting there in the water. So they says, "Get on." What the hell is this all about? Says, "Well, you're going with them." So when I got on, this was set up inside for guys that had spinal and neck and head injuries. And they were all in body casts. And they were laying in baskets, layered baskets, all on the walls of this airplane. Well, there was one empty basket on the bottom, and they didn't want to fly with an empty basket, so they put me in that basket. if you can believe that. I even got the log of that airplane. But we flew without lights, no radios for I don't know how many hours. We slept most of the time with all the moaning and groaning going on. And we landed at Johnson Island. And they let me off, and then they took off again and flew on into Fort Island. And then I got on another troop ship that came by, and then I went to Fort Island and was put in another hospital there. So I spent about a week or 10 days there in that hospital, again doing therapy for my foot. But I could walk pretty good. I had a cast on there that I could use my heel with and so on. I think I was there for about a week or 10 days. And they changed doctors. And a doctor had to come down the ward to look at everybody's chart. And I was missing. And I was taking therapy and fooling around with some of my buddies down there. And when I finally got to my ward, that nurse just chewed my ass out. Where the hell have you been? So this new doctor looked at my chart. And I had already asked the nurse if I could go back to my unit at Maui. And she said, well, that's up to the doctor. And this new doctor looked at my chart, and he looked at my leg, and he said, well, you're going back to the States. And I said, well, I don't want to go back to the States. I want to go to my unit. He said, well, I'm sorry, but you're going back to the States. And I was dumb enough to ask him if I could talk to his supervisor. Big mistake. And he said, no, get your ass out to that Jeep, you're going home. In no uncertain terms. Well, I'd made a mistake there, but anyway, I did want to go back to my unit because they were at Maui. So I never did get to go back. I took a troop ships and landed at San Francisco, went under the Golden Gate into a temporary hospital there, which they had set up. And got liberty there, got a uniform, got some money, went ashore with, or went to town rather, with a couple other guys. Met some waves, had a few drinks with them, went dancing. They had these dance halls in San Francisco at the time where they had girls there that would dance with servicemen, and they had you had to buy tickets over at the booth, and you had to give them one of your tickets. When you ran out of tickets, you had to go buy some more. But so we danced and had some fun, and eventually went back to the hospital. Of course, as you know, V-mail was the only way we'd contact our parents during the war. But I was able to make a phone call from San Francisco. By the way, they let us do that as part of our benefits when we got ashore in San Francisco. First time I talked to my parents in almost 2 years. But anyway, they had gotten the telegram that I'd been wounded in action. At least it wasn't one that I'd be KIA. So I think I was there about 4 or 5 days. And they gave us a form to fill out. And on this form, they listed all the various hospitals that you could be transferred to anywhere in the U.S. And one of them was, of course, Great Lakes, Illinois, which would be the closest to my home. And they had a contract with ATC, Army Transport Command. No, I'll take that back. That's another part of the story. They had the railroad that they were using to take guys to these various places where you wanted to go. So I picked out, they had to make 3 choices. So I put Great Lakes, Great Lakes, Great Lakes. Big mistake. We'll show this smart aleck Marine what we can do. So they sent me to Farragut, Idaho, the farthest hospital from Illinois that they could find. Well, went up there by train. I knew I'd made a mistake, but Farragut, Idaho turned out to be a paradise. It's on that little tiny piece of Idaho that goes up to Canada. It had been a Navy boot camp. I didn't know that. Toward the end of the war, they turned it into a hospital. So they had all these wards, and I don't know how many patients they had there, but it was full. So I was assigned a bed in a ward. Met a lot of other guys there, all Marines, and I think I stayed there a little over a month. And of course, guys were coming in and going out, and so on and so forth. We got liberty to go into Coeur d'Alene, was the main town there, and also Sandpoint, which was north a little bit, and they had a USO up there. So we went up there a few times and danced with the girls, and I can't remember right now, but I was there at least about 2 months in that hospital.
You talk about getting back to the States. You're still rehabbing your foot injury, your wound. You talk about dancing. How do you dance on a bad foot?
Well, the foot is healed for the most part. All there's left is the scar and the bone growth in there, so I don't have any trouble with that at all.
What kind of rehabilitation did they do as they took you through these different hospitals for this wound?
Mostly the same thing as this whirlpool thing. That's about all they had at the time. And they showed me the x-ray of that was made there at Saipan, and I don't see how they had split the knuckle in the behind the toe into about 6 pieces. How they ever got them put back together, I'll never know. But it's working fine. It's no different than the other foot now. It's still there, but
Well, you must have had some very good surgeons then.
well, they were young guys, but I guess we did have pretty good doctors. But I was transferred from Farragut, Idaho to Klamath Falls, Oregon, which was a Marine base. I didn't know that. It was a rehab base. And of course, what you're there for is to be moved out through all the paperwork and everything. One at a time, you had to go through all the whatever they had to do there. That no training and everything, but make sure that you're capable of getting home, because that's where they turned you loose. So being a clerk and everything, we had liberty. We had a lot of fun. I started drinking. I never drank in the military, but I did there. And in fact, I started in San Francisco. But we had a first sergeant that was in charge of our barracks, and he was an alcoholic. And every weekend he'd get loaded, and he'd never show up in the office until sometime around noon on Monday, hungover. So one day, one Sunday, I went in there and I sat down at his typewriter to type a letter to my parents, because they couldn't read my handwriting, never could. Well, lo and behold, here comes this SOB, come walking in. He did not go out and get drunk that weekend. For some reason, I don't know why, but he showed up in the office and he caught me using his typewriter. Well, he says, just a minute. So he got on the phone and he called the CO down at the headquarters. He says, Colonel, I found you a typist. So they transferred me down to that headquarters and froze me for 3 months. typing out paperwork for guys going through, getting discharged for 3 months. And I wasn't too happy about it. I met a lot of other guys there. But it turned out to be a kind of a blessing because one guy went through, and he was an older guy, and he had a family back east. And the last question they ask you is, there's a gunnery sergeant there, you know, the guy that has a bursting bombs on his collar, warrant officer. The last thing he asks you, make sure you got your money, all the forms are filled out, and the last question he asks you is, you want to be in the reserve, don't you? And he's going like this. And every guy is so anxious to get out, he said, oh yeah. So he marks down there, reserve. Here's your papers, here's your money, out you go. Well, one guy went through there, this guy who was older, and I could hear him because I was all in the same room. And he answered that question, no. And I thought that gunner was going to shoot his pants. He looked up at him and he said, what the hell's the matter with you? He said, well, I have a choice, don't I? And the guy said, well, you do. So he marked no on there. Took his parents and his papers and away he went. So when I finally went through, they let me off just 10 days before Christmas. They let me go through. I had all my stuff written out anyway. I sat right next to an artist. And he, in fact, I think I brought it with me. He made out the discharges in scroll, artistic scroll, instead of typing. They're beautiful. And I was the last one he did. I got to know him pretty well. So my discharge is written out in artist scrolling. It's beautiful. Anyway, when I went through, of course, I said no. And he looked at me with that funny look, you know, frowning, and says, okay, get the hell out of here. And he put no down there. I did not have to go to Korea. I was single. All of those guys that went put yes on their discharges ended up in Korea. 1953. Probably saved my life. But I got home 3 days before Christmas. I hitchhiked all the way from Klamath Falls, Oregon in the wintertime. Didn't have any trouble getting rides. I was in uniform. And I got to my home about 10 o'clock at night. Had to take a taxi cab from downtown. And my mom and dad were thrilled, of course. And I don't know where my brother was at the time. I think he was living with my aunt. But anyway, I got there in December of 45. And I started college in January of 46 in my hometown at Bradley University. Graduated there. Well, a lot of other things happened, but I was the only one in my family that ever went to college. But I have to admit that I had PTSD at that time. Not really knowing what it was at the time, but I was a mess. Total mess. And never got arrested. Probably should have. But how the hell I ever got through college, I never know. Because I cut class so many times that no one could ever get through school. But the school needed the money. So I did graduate. From there, I went into the oil and gas business, selling oil field equipment for 37 years. I met my wife on a blind date. I didn't like girls very well. And because of that incident that happened before. One of my friends that I knew at college, because when I left college, I moved to Detroit, selling car insurance door to door. And one of my college friends lived in Detroit. Well, he was dating an airline stewardess whom I knew from school. She was living in Chicago with two other American Airlines stewardesses. His parents were in Detroit, and he was engaged to this girl. So he wanted her to come to Detroit to meet his parents. She wouldn't go without a chaperone. So she brought a chaperone to Detroit, and the chaperone had to have a date. Reluctantly, I became the date. So here again, I didn't care for girls very much. But as it turned out, this girl was another American Airlines stewardess, and sometimes she would dead end into Detroit. So we got to see each other quite often. Her home was in Texas. This couple broke up. And the girl and I stayed together in a way. And we eventually got married. She saved my life. Anyway, the other couple broke up. We went to both of their weddings. And back in those days, if an airline stewardess got married, she had to resign her job. So American Airlines paid our way to Acapulco and back for our honeymoon. And I was selling that car insurance, back and forth. And, well, long story short, I went to a cocktail party one evening in Joliet, Illinois, with her parents, who came. He was a construction engineer with Texaco, and there was a Texaco refinery over at Blue Island, Illinois, where they were rebuilding the units over there. I went to a cocktail party one night because we were living in Joliet, and I met a friend of his, and I told him I was out of work. I was going back to Detroit because I knew people back there to get a job. He said, well, I know somebody that's looking for somebody. So I said, well, okay, I'll go meet him. And the headquarters was in downtown Chicago. So I loaded up my car. I was ready to go to Detroit. And I drove into Chicago because I had an appointment with this guy. And it was pouring down rain. I didn't have enough money to hire a garage, which is expensive on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. So I parked way out on Grant Park. So I sat there for a few minutes deciding whether I should get wet going all the way into that office, or should I drive from here on to Detroit and forget about that interview. Well, I didn't want to disappoint my in-laws, so I walked across Grant Park, went up, saw that guy, and we had a nice long talk, and he hired me on the spot. I stayed with that company for 37 years, selling oil field equipment all over the world. And stayed with the same lady, of course, for 64 years. And was transferred to New York City, which is the only transfer I had with that company, except coming back. We spent 2 years in New York. Our son was born there. And after 2 years, I was transferred back to the home office had moved to Denver from Chicago. So I was transferred to Denver to the home office. And I stayed there till today. But I traveled. We had branches in Alaska, Canada. I even had a customer in Honolulu. But I had to travel to Japan, ironically, to buy steel, part of my job. The oil business was cyclical. And when you have boom times, our steel mills can't keep up with the demand. So I had to go to foreign countries to buy steel. One of them was Japan. But I was dealing with a whole different group of people. They even had an office in Denver. And then I traveled to France, Germany, England, other steel mills to buy steel. Even took my wife along with me a couple of times. So we've been in Denver since 1959.
When did you didn't know it was PTSD early? It didn't have a name, did it?
No.
When did you begin to realize it was working on you?
Well, after I retired, I went to work, did several different things, but I ran into a guy. There was the movie Flags of Our Fathers. You remember that movie? Well, it was going to have a premiere here in Denver at a theater out near where we lived. And I had seen an article in the paper about a guy who had gone over to Wilshire Country Club and met somebody that I knew over there, and his name was in there, along with this guy. And he was starting a foundation. And he mentioned the fact that he wanted to get some veterans together to find some veterans to go to this movie. Well, of course, I knew all the Marines in town. So I called this guy on the phone. His name was Tim Davis. And he had just started this organization called the Greatest Generations Foundation, if you're aware. So I met him at the theater. In the meantime, I got about 10 Marines to come with me and meet me over there. So that's where we all met, and that's where I met Tim Davis. And I went to work for the foundation. Now that was about 14 years ago. And that's what I've been doing ever since, is working with veterans.
That has to be interesting. You must have found an awful lot of guys that were in need of help.
And that's right. And then I got to the point when I was talking to all these veterans coming in, I interviewed them and got all their information and so on, started working on me. And I got to the point where I had to resign. So I quit. And I fumbled around for several months. And that's when I found out that the Vietnam guys that were coming back were having the same type of problems. And in 1980, I think it was, that's when the Veterans Administration made the decision, oh, I know what it was now. Back when I got discharged, I went to the VA right away because I drew a pension from my foot wound. It was called psychoneurosis at that time. Psychoneurosis. And none of us wanted to have the name psycho attached to our name. So I did not take that route. But I was interviewed by a psychiatrist at the VA, and I have a sheet of paper that he made out that gave me, what is it they test your IQ? And he tested my IQ, and I still have that number on the piece of paper he gave me. And also on there, he analyzes my character, and he put the two words on there, easily irritated. I still have that piece of paper today. So in 1983 was when I found out that the VA had changed and taken the word psycho out of that condition and changed it to post-traumatic stress disorder. That's when I found out 3 years after they did that. At that time, I was still working. I went back to work for Tim Davis at the foundation. Now going forward, you know, when you have an old injury when you're young, like athletes do, what happens when they get to be 75 years old? That thing comes back. That's what happened to me. I have the terrible bad knee. I had to have my hip replaced 3 times. And I have, this shoulder has a, what do you call a,
Rotor cuff.
well, the, what was the word?
Artificial shoulder? Or
No, not
rotator cuff?
artificial, no. Rotator cuff,
Yeah.
torn rotator cuff. That all come back to haunt me. Even though I was an athlete in college, and even afterwards, I was a pole vaulter. But when I got to be 65 years old, that's when these things started on me. That's why I'm walking in this cane today. I heard my third hip operation here just in October. Well, anyway, I went into the VA at Lowry to file a claim because my pals told me I should file a claim of this, this, and this. So I went in there to see this lady, VSO, Veteran Service Officer. Catherine Workus is her name. So I told her what I wanted to do, so she started reading my discharge. As she started reading my discharge, I broke down. I started sobbing, went down on the floor, and I couldn't recover. And that's when she knew what was happening. She says, well, I'm going to file your claim. She finally got me straightened out, got me up into a chair. And she says, I'm going to file your claim for your knee and your hip and your shoulder, but I'm also going to file a claim for PTSD for you. And that's what she did. And then she turned me over to another guy that worked for the VA. Can't think of his name right now. But the same thing happened to me when I went into his office. A couple of days later, he started reading my discharge, and I broke down. Kind of like I did here, only for a different reason. So I went back to the VA, and they made the determination that I had PTSD. I had to agree with them because I knew what it was then. All the Vietnam guys finally got it straightened out. It goes back to that psychoneurosis. It's still in the medical books, which I have. So I turned myself in, and eventually it worked on me till the point that I became 100% disabled with PTSD. But the way to control it is to talk about it. Because I see a psychiatrist every month at the VA Center at Lowry. I'm also part of a Monday morning group of about 15 guys, most of them from Vietnam, that are in the same boat. And we have a very nice group of these guys. So I go there every Monday. Well, since I hurt my knee, I haven't been back for a while. And the fact that my wife passed away, I couldn't go to the meetings for a while because I had to move. But that's what brought it on. It took quite a while, but I knew I wasn't right.
Well, this is,
How do you think that affected you in, say, the 40 to 50 years that you didn't know what this was or how to address it?
I kept it hidden from my family and my wife. I can remember getting up in the middle of the night and going outside barefoot and walk around in the snow. Things like that. Cold snow on your feet.
You talked about the fact your wife saved your life.
Well, I quit the drinking, of course. And if I was going to make anything out of myself, I better, at least at that time, keep this information to myself. That was a decision I made. And I was successful in doing so. Although we had normal troubles like any married couple does with 2 children. And she was fully aware of what happened to me when I turned myself into the VA. But by then time, our children are adults. And we were married for 64 years. So by that time, it was okay to let this be part of my life. And she helped me all the way through it. She never questioned me about any of my problems that she probably might have recognized. She never said a word. So I guess that's what I mean. She kept me from going off the deep end.
Now, your World War II, how many guys from World War II didn't know what to do?
A lot of them. A lot of them that I knew. And I knew those guys were in the same boat that I was. But I didn't want to go in there and tell them I was a psycho, have that record go into my college records, or have my family find out. My mother and father? No way. I kept it hidden. It wasn't easy to do, but now that it's out in the open, I don't have to do that anymore.
When we first started doing these interviews, in almost 15 years, now basically it was the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. It was right after. Veterans weren't talking
No.
at all at that time.
No.
Did you talk among yourselves?
Yes? Some of us? Yeah, we did.
Did it help?
I'll give you one example. There were only 3 squad members left out of my original squad when the war was over. 3 out of 14. We had replacements, but just the 3 guys. And believe it or not, I did not know where they were because I had left them and they had gone back to their homes. And believe it or not, I accidentally ran into both of them in accidental circumstances. Before I got married, I went to Washington, D.C. to sell insurance. And I had an office in an office building, and one day I went down on the elevator opened. Who's standing right in front of me but my squad leader? He was an elevator inspector. He was single, dressed in a suit. I was living in a rooming house with 37 other women, 15 men. So we got together. I got him a date, and we've been pals and have connected ever since. He got married, of course, had a family in Virginia. I went to Denver. But secondly, my other foxhole buddy came to Denver one time and went to the GSA, General Services Administration. He was an architect in Mississippi. And he went out there for a bid opening. And if you've ever been out there, they have a little bleachers in the room where you go in, where they open all the bids. And the bidders can sit in these little bleachers and watch them open the bids. So he went in there. Well, you have to wait. And there's a whole bunch of people in there. Well, he sat next to a guy he didn't know. And they just accidentally said, my name is Arthur. And, well, hi, my name is John. Well, where are you from? Art says, well, I'm from Mississippi, or Pennsylvania originally. And this guy said, well, I'm from Peoria. And Art said, did you say Peoria? No, he's telling me this. And he said, yeah, Peoria. He said, well, I was in the Marine Corps with a guy from Peoria. And this is years later. He said, well, what's his name? He said, oh, well, you wouldn't know him. It's a pretty big city. And I said, well, I might. He said, his name is Jim Blane. He said, well, hell yes, I know him. I was in class with his brother. Art Godfrey was beside himself. And not only that, he said, he lives here in Denver. Now, you talk about circumstances, I tell you. Well, Art had a flight to catch after this bid opening, so he called me from the airport. Oops.
All right. It's okay. Don't have to worry about the jacket.
I was in shock. So the three of us have stayed in touch with each other ever since. Now, both of those guys are deceased, but I have stayed in touch with both of their widows, whom I have met. Art brought his wife to Denver to stay with us for several days. We talked among ourselves, but we never talked about the war. And then John Ryan, who was our squad leader, I stayed in touch with him by mail and by phone all the time. And I went to Washington, D.C. one time with a bunch of veterans to go to Walter Reed and the other hospital to talk to veterans about life after losing a leg, and that kind of stuff. Well, we accidentally were invited down to a graduation of a girl down there from a college. And one of the men that was with me was with the foundation also. So he drove me down there. And I told him, I said, well, the widow of my squad leader happens to live in Richmond. He said, well, we're going to be at this luncheon over at the college. I'll give her a call. So he called her. She came over to the luncheon at the University of Richmond, and I met her. And we've been in touch with each other ever since. John Ryan's wife, my squad leader, who is now deceased. But that's how we accidentally met. The only two guys who were left in my squad.
Do you still work with the VA hospital with others?
Yep.
What do you do there?
Well, I take guys over there who have trouble getting into the VA. A lot of guys are reluctant. They run into people over there that don't give a damn. But there are people there who do, whom I know. So I have figured out the way to get from one point to another. And I've gotten a lot of guys their benefits that they have coming. And traveling with the foundation, I've been back to Iwo Jima twice. Tokyo, Hiroshima. Went to Washington, D.C. several times with groups of veterans with the foundation. And working with the foundation, because some of these guys have got the same problem I have. So I've helped them, introduced them to the right people to get through that sort of thing. And some guys just are afraid to go over there. They get turned down so many times, and people don't really care. But if you get to the right person, and I had to fight my way through it quite a while, till I actually caught the right person. And the right person took me by the hand and moved me right through it to 100%. I draw 100% disability right now, every month.
How many of the guys are not able to stick with it as long as you did or fight for it?
Well, a lot of them guys drop out, I know. And I don't argue with them in any way. I just try to let them know that it can be done. If you want me to help you, I will. Don't be afraid to ask. So it's been something I enjoy doing, so to speak, seeing the result. And we've become lifelong friends.
What was it like going back to Iwo Jima?
Well, I was reluctant to start with. And I asked my VSO, my Veteran Service Officer, whether I should go or not. And she said, yes, you should. And I asked the other guy that I talked to, he said, I agree with her, you should go, because you're going in a group. It's not like going by yourself. You're going in a group. And some of the other guys have got the same problem. Maybe they don't know it yet, and some do, and some didn't know it yet. So it was kind of a enlightening thing to do. What we did was the Greatest Generation Foundation, let's say we have 12 veterans. Well, we get together with a college, and we ask the college if they would send some of their political science or their geography or history students might like to go on this trip with us. And you can participate in the cost of it if you want to, otherwise we'll pay for the whole thing because the foundation is fully funded. Our first trip, we had 13 veterans and 13 college students, both boys and girls, from the College of the Ozarks at Point Lookout, or Branson, Missouri. And they helped us with the cost. And I had a young lady as my companion. And we went to Okinawa first. Well, Honolulu, of course, and then Okinawa. We got stuck over there, but that's another story. The government finally gave us an airplane. So we flew over to Iwo from Okinawa. And she was with me. I went to the very spot that I could find. And it was on the very same day, March the 3rd, that she and I stood there where I got wounded and held hands. She was in tears. And still in touch with her. The next trip we make, we go to get the Air Academy. Tie those kids in with veterans. Ohio State University, University of Wisconsin. One veteran with each student. It's a hell of a trip for them. And that's how the foundation has grown. It now has no money worries whatsoever. When Tim and I first got started, we were begging people for donations. I had to send him money to England to bail him out of the hotel. To London. Take a trip June the 6th every year, go to Normandy. Every December 7th, we take a group to Pearl Harbor. I've been several times. I've never gone to Europe because I feel guilty going because I didn't serve there, and I would take the place of another guy who could go. He's invited me several times, but I won't go.
Well, you talked earlier about Don Whipple, who we also interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
That you two go out and talk to schools. Why are you doing this?
Well, we get invited, I don't feel comfortable turning them down. And in fact, we go every semester to Cherry Creek High School. That one teacher out there just has to have us there because they have an elective in their history class of World War I, World War II. And those kids who choose the elective welcome there are no World War I guys they can talk to, so they really come to see us. And we take our memorabilia with us. I've got an M1 rifle I take with me, and a Japanese rifle that I take, and a both standard in the war. Don has a samurai sword. I have a flag. A few other things that we take with us when we go.
It's good to hear this is happening. Are the students really responsive, really interested?
They are. They are. Some more than others. Boy, they love those rifles, I tell you. They can't wait to get up and...
Going back to Iwo Jima, how many are left from Iwo Jima? Do you know total?
Oh, gee. We had an association here in Denver that broke up because so many of them died, and the Rocky Mountains are so scattered. But there is a national association that is still in existence. And I hear from them every once in a while. There's a publication that comes out. We had our own publication here for a while, 4th Marine Division. But there's just so few of us left anymore. And they're trying to reorganize another one over in, a guy called me the other day and sent me some stuff in the mail. Iwo Jima Association of America. He's trying to put together a group. I think he's going to be okay with it, but he wanted to know if any of our guys wanted to be involved. We do have a meeting every month of all Marine Corps guys over here at the American Legion, Arvada.
64th.
Yeah, 64th. They're from all different wars, but there's probably a handful of us World War II guys over there. But we meet every month. Women Marines, wives, so on. It's a luncheon. We don't have any dues or anything like that. I'll have a speaker usually. Get a good turnout, anywhere from 40 to 80 people show up. A 13 or 16-year war. Vietnam was 16 years. Afghanistan, how long we been there? I can't comprehend this sort of going on. What an emotional thing to have to go through, to come home, turn around and go back, leaving the family, come back again. That's just, I just don't know how they handle that sort of thing. It's a terrible way to be involved with it. But it is what it is. Shameful. I'm really kind of glad that World War II happened the way it did. Started with an explosion. This is what I tell school kids. And ended with an explosion.
We certainly thank you for coming to us and spending the time and letting us know all of this. This is valuable. We really thank you.
Good. You're welcome.